Good evening, Heaven Bound family, and anyone who may be watching. This is Pastor Larry with a moment in the Word on this Tuesday. It'll be the 2nd of March. And anyway, we're down to the 15th chapter of the book of Revelation, and it only has the 8 verses, and so we're going to try to do the entire chapter, 15th chapter tonight. You remember in chapter 14, we just got through discussing the first five verses. We're introduced again to the 144,000. In verse 6, we're introduced to the angel with the everlasting gospel. In verses 7 down through, or 8 down through 12, we're told of the awful plight, the eternal destiny of those who took the mark of the beast, those who reject Christ. In verse 13, we were given the blessed are they who die in the Lord. And then we covered chapter 14 down through the verse 20. We're in anticipation. John sees Christ and the three angels putting their sickles in to bring judgment, to reap the unsaved of the tribulation period, to bring them into judgment. Here in chapter 15, he said, "And I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 heads, 7 angels having the 7 last plagues, for in them is filled up the wrath of God." You remember in chapter 6, we were introduced to the 7 seals, which chapter 6 through 8. In chapter 8, the 7th seal introduced us to the 7 trumpets, and we had the 7 trumpets all the way down through chapter 11. In chapter 11, the 7th seal was sounded, and everything that happened between chapter 11 and chapter 16, verse 6, or actually verse 1, I guess we could say, or verse 6, whichever one you want to say there, when it's announced or when it's actually sounded. But everything that happens between 11 and 15 and chapter 16 has to do with the 7th trumpet. And now then, we're going to look at the 7 vials. These are the final wrath of God that is going to be poured out upon this earth. It's going to bring about total destruction to much of the earth. Remember, we said the theme of Revelations is that cannot be redeemed must be destroyed, and a third of Israel will be redeemed and taken into the millennium. Many of those who have martyred during the 7 years tribulation period will are awaiting the judgment of the vengeance upon their enemies, and so forth. When we enter into chapter 15 here, we have kind of another pause just before we pick up the 7 last vials. And so here he says, "I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels having the 7 last plagues, or vials, or bowls, as they're called. For in them is filled up the wrath of God." Now, they're mentioned here in chapter 15. We're introduced to them in chapter 15, verse 1, but we won't actually encounter them till the 2nd chapter of, or to the 16th chapter. The reason he says here that it's, I saw a sign in heaven, so we're back in heaven. It's great and marvelous in the sense that it is great and marvelous to those martyred for Christ's sake, because it's going to mean an end of their suffering, and God is going to finally bring vengeance upon those who have persecuted and martyred them. In verse 2 he says, "And I saw, as it were, a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that had gotten the victory over the beast, and over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, stand on the sea of glass, having the harps of God." You remember we were introduced to the sea of glass, I believe it was back in chapter 5. At that time it was empty, and now then it is going to be filled with all of the martyred saints who have refused to take the mark of the beast. And they're going to be on the sea of glass there. We talked back, I believe it was in chapter 5, about the fact that the sea of glass in the Old Testament tabernacle was actually a water basin. It was a lava where the priests washed themselves before coming in to the holy place there. And here, while it is not water, it's made of glass, it is before the altar there, and it represents those who have been cleansed by the blood of Christ. It says here in verses 3 and 4, and they, let me just read 2 again. "And I saw, as it were, a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that had gotten the victory over the beast, and over the image, and over the mark, and over the number of his name." Notice 4 things there they got victory over: the beast, the image, the mark, and the number that was stamped on their hand or their forehead there. "Stand on the sea of glass, having the harps of God." Again, we were introduced back to the harps who was playing before the throne there, and the angels who playing the harps are those, not angels, I'm sorry, but those who's playing harps there before the 24 elders, as God's final judgment had been pronounced. And here, these are the same harpers harping, and they, this is the martyred, they sang the songs of Moses and the servant of God, and the songs of the Lamb, saying, "Great and marvelous are thy works, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are thy ways, thy King of saints. Who shall not fear thee, O Lord, and glorify thy name, for thou only art holy. For all the nations shall come and worship before thee, for thy judgments are made manifest." Now, the Song of Moses, there's 2 possibilities here. Some think maybe they sung the song that of Moses there when they came across out of Egypt, across the Red Sea there, and they sung the song, "The rider has fallen into the sea," and so forth, and gave praise to God for having escaped out of Egypt. More likely, the song that they sung is a second song Moses wrote, which you'll find it in chapter, mentioned that he wrote the song in chapter 31 and was told to sing it to their children. In chapter 32, in verses 39 through 43. And the reason I say this is probably the song is because it is so much like what is happening here in Revelations in the setting here. Is God bringing judgment upon the wicked. And so possibly that's the song that they're singing. You can pick either one you want. And then the song of Christ here, the song of the Lamb, it says here. And it says here, I think Dr. David Jeremiah mentioned 4 things they sung about God here and glorifying God. The Lamb here is the fact that his work, he says, saying, "Great and marvelous are thy works." And then his ways, Lord God Almighty, just and true art thy ways, thy King of saints. Who shall not fear thee, O Lord, and glorify thy name, for thou only art holy. While the word holy doesn't start with a W here, it shows his worth. And then, "For all nations shall come and worship before thee, for thy judgments are made manifest. And so here they're going to sing the song Moses and Lamb. This is the martyred saints there, as we read in verse 2. Now then, we come down to the last part of chapter 15. Verse 5 says, and after that I looked, and behold, the temple of the tabernacle of the testimony in heaven was open. And the 7 angels came out of the temple, having the 7 plagues, or the 7 vials, or the 7 bowls, whatever you want to call them. They're all 3 are mentioned. Clothed in pure and white linen, and having their breasts girded with golden girdles. This is the 7 angels with the 7 vials there. And in in the next chapter, we'll read about them further. It said, and one of the 4 beasts gave unto the 7 angels 7 golden vials full of the wrath of God, who liveth forever and ever. And the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power, and no man was able to enter into the temple till the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were fulfilled. Someone has mentioned, and I forget, I read so many, but one of the commentators mentioned that no one could enter the temple there to make intercession. In other words, grace is over, and now then the wrath of God is going to be poured out upon all of the ungodly. Now this wrath is not going to be poured out upon the tribulation saints. They've already went through their tribulation in the sense that they've already been martyred, and it's not upon the church, for the church was raptured out back in chapter 4, and it will be upon Israel to bring about a final purging of the nation of Israel, as we read in Zechariah chapter 13, verse 8. That's chapter 15, and tomorrow we'll look at chapter 16 and kind of begin a ending of the book of Revelations. Though we've got several more chapters yet, it's all downhill from here on because of the plagues. It's no longer what the Antichrist does to those who reject him. It's what God does to those who reject Jesus. Hey, this is Pastor Larry. Go forth today and be blessed. Bless someone, and it'll bless God, and God then will bless you, as we say every evening. Have a wonderful and blessed Tuesday, and may God just give you a wonderful week.